Well, hello, everyone. I am really excited that we're being joined by Hal Finkel for our keynote today here at CHIUW. And just let me tell you a little bit about Hal. Hal's a program manager for the computer science research at the U.S. Department of Energy Office of Science, Advanced Scientific Computing Research, or ASCR. So prior to joining ASCR, Hal was the lead for compiler technology and programming languages at Argonne's Leadership Computing Facility. And he's also been part of the DOE's Exascale Computing Project, or ECP. He was the Path Forward technical lead, and he's been the PI and the co-PI of several multi-institutional activities. Hal also serves as the vice chair of the C++ Standards Committee, and he's helped develop a hardware hybrid accelerated cosmology code, which is called HACK for short. And this is a code that's been a 2-time Gordon Bell Prize finalist. Hal's graduated from Yale in 2011 with a PhD in theoretical physics, focusing on numerical simulations of early universe cosmology. And we're really excited to hear what Hal has to say about the DOE and programming languages.
Okay, well, Michelle, thank you very much for the introduction. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the DOE, kind of setting some context for where I sit within the organization and what we do. And then I'm going to talk about how we interact with the community, with the research community, with the wider technology community, and how that helps set our priorities as a research funding agency. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what those priorities are, and I'm going to sort of weave through that narrative, hopefully some things that are relevant, particularly to you all here, as the chapel community. So let's start there. So first, I'm going to start out presuming that this is an international audience. So if you are well familiar with the Department of Energy, then just bear with me for a moment. But let me say that the Department of Energy is an agency of the United States government. It has a very broad mission. So the official mission statement here is that we ensure America's security and prosperity by addressing its energy, environmental, and nuclear challenges through transformative science and technology solutions. And as you might imagine, it's a very broad mission. And so there's a lot of things that we do, and there are a lot of different communities that we serve. And so now I'm going to kind of narrow down from there and say that within the Department of Energy, we have an Office of Science. And the Office of Science has a number of different program offices within it. And primarily we fund basic research, mission-inspired basic research. And the different program offices focus on different areas of science. So, for example, we have basic energy sciences, which focus on kind of chemical and molecular systems. I'm going to skip my office for a moment. Then we have office that focuses on biological and environmental research. And that's everything from climate research through synthetic biology. So that's a fairly broad mission in and of itself. We have an office that focuses on fusion energy, an office that focuses on high energy physics, an office that focuses on nuclear physics, and then my office, which focuses on advanced scientific computing research. And as Michelle said, we call that ASCR. That's how we pronounce ASCR, the acronym. And so this office has a pretty broad scope, focusing on basic research for all of computing, but also providing user facilities and a number of things, as I'll talk about in just a moment. Before I get there, I do also want to mention that we fund activities all over the United States, and in fact, in some cases, all over the world, the activities that we fund take place in private industry. They take place at universities, and they also take place within our national laboratory system. And so our national laboratory system has 17 national laboratories all over the country, and the different national laboratories are homed in some sense to different parts of the Department of Energy. On this map here, the labs in the dark blue are the ones that are stewarded by the Office of Science, and many of these laboratories are quite large organizations. Some of them are more special purpose, but some of them are quite large, having many thousands of scientists and engineers working on a whole wide range of different scientific challenges. All right, so I mentioned that I'm sitting inside the Advanced Scientific Computing Research Program within the Office of Science, and that program has within it 3 different parts. So these 3 different divisions. And so first, I'll mention that there's a facilities division. The facilities division, through our national laboratories, deploys some of the largest supercomputers in the world for open scientific research. And in fact, you may have heard recently that we were able to demonstrate on the most recently released top 500 list an exaflop LIMPAC result for our newest supercomputer, Frontier, which is at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. But there are several other supercomputers that we also field and make available through various programs, time allocation programs, to researchers all over the country and all over the world. And in addition, we have something called ESNet, which is a high-performance network which connects all of these computers together and also connects to some places in Europe. And that deployment activity is overseen by our facilities division. Then on the right-hand side of the slide here, we also have an advanced computing technologies division that focuses on novel computing technologies such as quantum computing, neuromorphic computing, and so on, advanced microelectronics. All of these areas are extremely important for our scientific future, and we have a division that focuses on those kinds of technologies. And then in the center here, we have what we call the Computational Science Research and Partnerships Division, which focuses primarily on funding basic research. Within that part of the organization, we have a computational partnerships team that focuses on programs that pair computer scientists and applied mathematicians with domain scientists in order to advance innovative science. We have applied mathematics. And when I say applied mathematics, you should think about things like machine learning algorithms, optimization algorithms, uncertainty quantification, discretization schemes, and so on. So that's the focus area for applied mathematics. And then we have computer science. And computer science focuses on things like programming languages and programming systems, compilers, data management software, and data, scalable machine learning, and so on. So there's a whole set of things that that fall within computer science, and that's our core computer science research program. And that's where I sit. So I'm a program manager in that box in the program. Okay. And since we are a funding organization, I'm just going to say a little bit about funding. The opportunities that we provide are open to a wide array of different potential applicants, and I'm just going to mention that this is true sort of in many different career stages. So just to sort of go over some things quickly, if you are a graduate student or will soon become a graduate student, we have something called the Computational Science Graduate Fellowship, and if your graduate studies have anything to do with computational science, I highly recommend you check that out. Similarly, if you are a professor or someone supervising graduate students, and we'd like to encourage your graduate students to apply for funding, then I also recommend you check this out. This is an excellent program that funds graduate work in many different scientific domains, but all tied together with the common thread of computational science or computer science and applied mathematics. All right. If you are a small business or looking to form a small business, we have a special program, as do several other government agencies, that fall into the SBIR and STTR categories. These are funding opportunities specifically for small businesses. And we have a significant portfolio of SBIR awards in computer science specifically, and of course in other areas more broadly that are part of the program. And it includes, kind of small amounts for doing very preliminary work, and then larger amounts for continuing that work when it's promising. We have an early career research program, which is actually a really important part of our portfolio, where we take younger PIs, or PIs that are earlier in their career, within 10 years of receiving their PhD, and will provide very promising applicants with 5 years of funding to pursue their own research programs. And this is an important way that we can stimulate the community and provide some funding stability for people who are pursuing really promising ideas. This is a program you can apply within your window of eligibility up to 3 times, so you get more than one bite at the apple. And there's a wide scope for topics that are applicable. The topics are generally released in the summer, so you could check for that in some number of months. And the pre-applications are generally due in the fall. So if you fall within this eligibility window, then I definitely encourage you to apply. The purpose of these awards, is not to kind of reward people who are already, Einstein. It's to take promising younger PIs and fund them to do innovative research. And so I definitely encourage you to check that out. And then, of course, we have targeted funding opportunities that fall in a wide variety of different domains. You can look at our website and sign up for announcements for those. They fund projects from between 2 to 5 years, depending on the award. And university researchers can often apply directly. People in companies can also often apply directly, although those targeted FOAs generally don't support commercial activity, so it has to be research, independent research. But subcontracting is often permitted, and collaborations are often permitted, and in some cases encouraged. So if you're interested in that, I definitely recommend checking out the website and seeing the state of things there. All right. And just to be specific about this, I have a little screenshot here of the website that shows you where to click to see the funding opportunities, where to see the past funding opportunities, and look for the abstracts of awards that have been made to universities and to companies. And I'm going to sort of transition a little bit now and talk about how we interact with the community and some priorities, because I mentioned that we have these targeted funding opportunities. Of course, we also have these other opportunities like the SBIR awards for small businesses and the early career awards, and they all have scope that's specified. So the question is, where does that scope come from? And to some extent, that scope comes from an understanding of our mission needs, but it also is strongly influenced by the priorities that are articulated by the research community. And so what we do is we will convene workshops and roundtables and other fora that we use to interact with the research community, but also to prompt the research community to articulate what are the most promising research directions in any particular given set of areas. And then we ask the research community to put together reports to inform us, right? But also to inform everyone else, what is the state of things and what directions does the community as a whole feel are most promising. And many of the reports from the workshops and roundtables that we sponsor are available on our website. They often come along with brochures. Now we ask the committees for the workshops to put together brochures. So if you don't want to read the 100-page version, you could read the 2-page version. But those are all available on our website. and you can actually see going back a long period of time how, what those priorities are and how they've evolved over time. So what I'm going to talk about for more or less the remainder of the presentation is some of these recent workshops and what kind of priorities have been articulated and how they fit in with everything else. Okay. So the first workshop that I'm going to talk about that we held last year was a workshop that was called the Workshop on Reimagining Co-Design. It was well attended by folks from our national laboratories, from universities, from industry, and focuses on this issue of hardware software co-design. If you are further interested in this topic, I'll tell you that the videos from the presentations are on the workshop website, and so you can check those out. We had some really insightful keynotes, as well as a number of shorter presentations. And in addition, many of the attendees were invited based on white papers, position papers that they submitted. And so all of those accepted position papers are also on the website, which is also a really great resource because you really can get the individualized opinions of many attendees focusing on all sorts of areas related to the design of hardware and software and system tools and programming languages and all the other pieces that go into designing hardware and the software ecosystem that goes along with it. And those are all available on the workshop website as well. And they have a permanent DOI, and so you can get a combined PDF using the link on the slide. All right. But before I go on, let me just say that when we talk about co-design and hardware and software design in this context, we have a number of different things in mind. So one is we're looking at the kind of hardware and software that run at the leadership scale, right? At the scale of these largest supercomputers in the world that we use to enable really innovative science, and so that's the leadership scale systems and software. That's one target of the co-design activities, but it's not the only target. So when you look at the kind of science that the Department of Energy has to perform to fulfill its mission, we often have systems, say when we're looking at climate, where we have a large number of sensors that are distributed in various places. And so we also have computing at the edge in that sense, right, where we have edge as in kind of lower powered devices. We also have, of course, very large scale experiments, particle accelerators and light sources and so on, and observatories for astrophysical observation and the like. And they often need computing that are kind of situated close to those experiments. And so that's the high performance edge. So we have edge in both of those senses. And we are concerned with the computational hardware and capabilities that go into that. And so in this co-design context, we were looking at things like accelerator hardware and chiplets and all those different pieces that you can use to put together modular and interesting and innovative hardware. But also looking at things like smart networking and memory and storage hardware that are increasingly enabling and incorporating computational capabilities into the hardware that otherwise does networking and memory and storage, and figuring out, of course, not only how do you enable and design and tune that kind of hardware, but also how do you program it. And so in addition to the trends that I just mentioned implicitly, there are some other motivating trends that I'll mention. So one is, in addition to the sort of chiplets and these other modular packaging technologies, there's also a increasing prevalence of open source hardware designs that are available, which enable low risk collaboration among academics and laboratories and industry that's driving innovation in this space. Of course, there's a lot of artificial intelligence driven technologies now that can drive the automated adaptation of hardware and software. There are a number of metrics that are important. So traditionally, HPC hardware and software, were driven by a few metrics, which were highly clustered around things like performance and energy efficiency. But now people are realizing that as a first-class consideration, they have to include other metrics, like security-related metrics, for example, and take the large multi-objective optimization problem that you get as a result, and includes things like security metrics into that overall optimization problem for the hardware and software. Plus, none of this would be possible in some sense if you didn't have the programs themselves, in a state where they were sufficiently adaptable, so that as you try and change the hardware design, you actually have software that can take advantage of those new hardware designs, and you can really evaluate how good or not good a particular idea is. And so, of course, we've seen, in traditional programming languages, we of course have, things like directives, OpenMP and OpenACC and the like. There are a lot of, C++ abstraction libraries now, like Cocos and Raja and so on, and SYCL and the standard C++ library to some extent. So that's all true. Of course, people are programming at a higher level, in some cases in Python and languages like that, Julia, and so all of these things are important because they enable some adaptivity of the programming model and the expression of the algorithm, and allow it to adapt to hardware. Of course, all of those languages I just mentioned, or at least many of them, have a key weakness, which is that they express parallelism, but only in a kind of local sense. So you don't have the ability to easily express parallelism and kind of move it between local and distributed in a uniform way. So I mean, in this context, there are some languages and frameworks that are attempting to address that problem. And but of course, since I'm at a Chapel conference, I should mention that Chapel and things that are kind of in that class, if there's anything else in that class, would be also quite useful in this particular context, because as you're trying to adjust your idea of what the hardware and the system look like and what the software look like, you need a language and a framework that allows you to sort of adapt how the parallelism is expressed and exploited. And so, different programming language design points in that regard are really important. Right. So, so this is sort of where this ends up. So we are, trying to figure out how we can invest in this area and potentially change the way that hardware and software design are done for future computing systems, which relies less on a kind of traditional monolithic cycle where you can do a small amount of analysis and maybe tune some general purpose design, integrate it, and keep going on a fairly long multi-year time scale, to something that is faster, that can be more adaptive and more flexible and more modular. And again, all of this depends on the fact that both the hardware and also the software have this flexibility and modularity, and are capable of really being adapted on timescales that are short enough that you can really iterate in a productive way. Okay, so so that was that workshop on reimagining co-design, and the priority research directions that came out of that were 4 things, which essentially summarize all the things I just said. So they're talking about creating new hardware capabilities that target heterogeneity and rapid design, but also software applications that can take advantage of that kind of architectural diversity. The incorporation of these new metrics, like security metrics, as a first-class citizen, along with energy efficiency and performance and so on. And then also the ability to inform all of that with very data-rich processes, so that you have the ability to really run and analyze workloads fairly comprehensively and use that information to adapt what you're doing. All right, so with that having been said, I'm going to go on and talk about a couple other recent things which are interesting. So one of which is that we also had a workshop earlier this year on the management and storage of scientific data. So again, you can think about the motivating factors here as very similar to the ones for the co-design workshop in some sense, because you have both needs from an application side, and then you also have technology evolution on the other side, which are both driving things forward. And on the technology side, of course, we're looking at things like smart storage and smart memory and smart networking, right? Again, the incorporation of computational capabilities into the overall hardware picture, and into specifically a lot of these other pieces where it didn't traditionally sit in a programmable and user accessible way. And so figuring out how you're going to do this, how you're going to support disaggregated and dynamically provisioned resources in this context is an additional challenge. And all of these things are kind of pushing forward innovation in how data can be stored and moved and loaded and searched and all that kind of thing. But it's also true that there are needs from the application side that are really important. Application workflows are becoming increasingly complicated, especially in scientific domains where you have potentially multiple experiments, multiple places where the data is being generated. You have large-scale computational resources, which may not be all that nearby. You have to move things around and have adaptive pipelines. And of course, people want results faster. So they are trying to do things on a more responsive basis than they had before. And this introduces additional challenges. Plus, there are additional needs for preserving the basic scientific method in some sense that people are realizing become much more challenging as the data sets get much larger. And so things like maintaining provenance information and other kinds of metadata become increasingly challenging. And the acronym that people are using now a lot is FAIR, right? They want data to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And those are all great keywords to use, but but in the end, it's a lot of work, and there's a lot of infrastructure that has to go into enabling that, and that's something that ends up being a key challenge. The priority research directions that came out of this workshop, there were also 4 of them. So the first one is getting better high productivity interfaces for accessing data efficiently. And so this could be in some sense thought of as an API problem, but or a search query language problem or what have you. But of course, when we talk about all these things, I think you should also think about places where the programming language and the programming environment can play a key role in addressing some of these challenges, because of course the programming language and the programming environment already has a good deal of knowledge about the semantics of the data that's being stored and moved and what computations were performed and so on. And so being able to take advantage of the fact that the programmer has already encoded that in some structured way when thinking about how you can record that kind of information and associate it with the scientific output products is, I think, an interesting opportunity. Okay, so in addition, and related to that, the second priority was understanding the behavior of complex data management systems. So that's, how do you, profile or analyze or what have you, the systems as they're running to really understand what are their properties, what's working well, what's not working well, where can performance be improved, and the like. And again, I think there are opportunities there for the programming environment and the programming system to assist with that kind of data collection and analysis. The third one was metadata management for provenance collection, for search, for access. Again, I think some of the same considerations apply. And then the last one was reinventing data services for new applications, devices, and architectures. And so this is going back to that question about, okay, if I have storage, if I have memory, if I have networking devices that have computational capabilities, that's great. But then how do I actually program those things? And of course, a programming language is a key consideration, and its associated programming system and compilers and everything else are key considerations. to actually making that practical, because a lot of the kind of naive, multi-source, separate environment systems that you might be able to quickly cobble together for some of these things are not necessarily or observably productive to actually use in practice. And so, like with the questions that people asked, years ago when GPUs and other accelerators started to become common in HPC, and they said, okay, well, how are we actually going to productively program heterogeneous applications that can take advantage of running on CPUs and so on, as they have done before, but also take advantage of GPUs? Well, now we're seeing heterogeneity on an even larger scale in some sense, because we have networking devices and compute device, along with compute devices, and also storage devices and memory devices that all have compute on them. And so you have to figure out what that means and how you're going to program all of that. So with that, I'm going to move on to another topic with an interesting programming language tie-in. So we had a roundtable discussion last year that was on parallel discrete event simulation. So parallel discrete event simulation is a modeling technique that models systems that have sort of distinguishable entities that interact with each other via discrete events. And there are a lot of things that fall into this general category of things. So you can think about simulations of things like transportation systems, where you have a lot of little cars and trucks and things running around and interacting with each other. But of course, there are also things like energy grid applications, thinking about the internet, right? The large-scale networks, of course, fall into this category. Some scientific simulation techniques, such as kinetic Monte Carlo models, many kinds of particle methods, where you have lots of different kind of discrete entities that kind of run around, but then also interact with each other in some way, are things that potentially fall into this category. Of course, with the recent COVID pandemic, we've all become quite cognizant of the fact that the epidemiology simulations are really important, and understanding how things will spread and how they can be contained and how to model them is really key. All of these things fall into this discrete simulation category, as do the simulation of hardware systems themselves. So, and this is true on many scales. So, I mean, starting from atomic scale simulations in some sense, up through circuits and up through systems and supercomputers, all of these things fall into this discrete simulation category. Okay, so discrete simulation is also interesting because it's different in some both qualitative and also quantitative way in terms of the hardware design points that are optimal for it. And so when you have discrete event simulation and you look at what kind of hardware does it run well on, you find in many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases, that those kind of simulations have different needs in terms of memory bandwidth and latencies, different needs in terms of networking capabilities and buffering and scheduling, different communication patterns, different synchronization needs between different parts, and so on. So the opportunities here are several, but the roundtable broke them down into these different categories. So there are your core advancements that are needed, right? Things like taking advantage of accelerators, different kinds of parallel decomposition and load balancing, event scheduling techniques that can be incorporated, plus of course the incorporation of machine learning. And this is true for surrogates, right? Like if you have individual entities that are doing things like you're modeling drivers in cars or what have you, you might need to make them smarter. You also might use machine learning as a surrogate for like an outer closure, right? Where you have some part of the system that you're simulating with high fidelity, but then you need to somehow get a coarse approximation for the rest of the world. Machine learning could be useful for that. And it's useful, of course, for outer loop optimization and other things. Other things that are kind of useful in the outer sense, the outer technology sense, are things like enabling federated execution, maintaining large ensembles, doing visualization, handling streaming data, and so on. But there's sort of one key thing I want to point out, which is one of the challenging things with discrete event simulations is that you have discrete events and you have things that have to communicate with each other in some dynamic way. So, of course, anytime when you have a system that has discrete dynamic dependencies, parallelization can become very challenging because your amount of parallelism might be quite limited, and you might not know exactly what it is until runtime. And so figuring out how you're going to exploit that on modern systems that have lots and lots of parallel execution capability, right, but limited serial execution speed up is a challenge. Now, the one way that people deal with this is essentially by doing speculative execution. They use an optimistic simulation technique. So what that means is that each of the little entities that you have in your discrete event simulation will just kind of proceed assuming that nothing interesting happens. And then if something interesting did happen, it may need to roll back the computation that it did to the point where the interaction should have taken place, compute the interaction, and then keep going. Now this means that you need an easy way for some potentially fairly complicated simulation code to roll back, right? To undo itself, to reverse itself. And so there's an interesting opportunity here for programming languages and programming environments that can express reversible computation to have a role here. So the attendees at the roundtable, talked about this in the context of domain-specific languages and also specialized compiler technology that, along with runtimes and, other sort of support infrastructure that can allow the user to easily program things, but also easily kind of generate the code necessary to undo all of that computation when needed. And so reversible computation comes up in this context in a very important way. The other piece of this, which I'll just point out for it's interesting to me anyway, is that reversible computation also comes up in other places where ASCR invests. So quantum computing, for example, often requires reversible computation, as do other sort of very low energy computation techniques require reversible computation. But there are a lot of opportunities here, as sort of indicated on the sort of little diagram on the right, where the programming language and the programming environment can play an important role. So this reversible computation thing is a unique angle, but of course, programmability and usability are general considerations. Load balancing, parallel load balancing is really important. Automated validation is really important, and so the programming system can have a particular impact on all of these different challenges. There have been other recent workshops that are interesting in various regards. So we've had recent work looking at advanced wireless technologies for edge deployments, or even for in larger scale experiments where you can use wireless to eliminate the number of wires you need. But either way, for edge systems and so on, there are unique programming challenges that occur there, for which the programming model and programming environment, have there are opportunities for them to have a real impact, and of course, sort of just going backwards in time, but sort of on a similar theme to things I talked about earlier. There were workshops on how you do large-scale data management for artificial intelligence, looking at FAIR and other things, and then how you do in situ data management, so you can do computation on data without necessarily storing it. You can also have data management in a streaming sense, which is really important because oftentimes, again, you're not really storing all the data and you have to stream it between systems and stream it for processing. So, I mean, this is something that we've been looking at for many years at this point. And I mentioned in a couple of places where artificial intelligence plays a role, but, just in general, looking at artificial intelligence algorithms, looking at deep learning, looking at neurosymbolic algorithms, all of these things are really key opportunities to improve scientific computing in the future. And all of these are places where the programming language and programming environment might have a really key role to play because the programming environment can be adapted to make some of the paradigms that you need to implement and some of the patterns that you need as a user to use some of these systems natural as opposed to sort of complicated and quirky and so on. So so that's the sort of overview of the programming system. Now, and the sort of various research workshops that impact programming systems. I'm going to finish up by highlighting one last activity that we've been involved in and planning for, which is not a basic research activity in and of itself, but is looking at the challenge of when you have research software and that research is successful and it then acquires some users and it is then also needed for future research to build on that previous research result, then what do you do with that software? How can you sustain it? How can you steward the ecosystem of such software so that not only can future research build on that software, but also application teams, other domain science teams, and other users elsewhere in the world and in the kind of space of various kinds of economic activities, right, from industry, from nonprofits, from anywhere else. How can they build on that kind of on that kind of software and have it be well supported and so on? All these are really key questions, and are made quite salient for us by the fact that a lot of our scientific software infrastructure for the last many years has been invested in by the Exascale Computing Project. The Exascale Computing Project, however, is ending. Its next fiscal year is, I think, is planned to be its last full year, and so what's happening now is that we're thinking about what is the long-term strategy for how we're going to maintain this kind of ecosystem, and we released a public request for information last year that looked at the potential scope for software stewardship activities, and this is pretty broadly framed. So this is everything from the development of particular software packages and sort of shared engineering support and curation and the like. All right, but also support for common infrastructure and workforce support, and support for training and all the different pieces that you need to really make software usable and sustainable, and around which you can grow a community. In the context of which you might have private sector organizations come in and help build a sort of commercial ecosystem. There are lots of different ways in which you need to support the community around software. Almost all of the software that we invest in is open source in this context, but open source software doesn't just kind of happen on its own, right? It needs to be supported, and to have an effective community around it, work needs to be done, and that work should be supported where it's valuable. And so this is the overall context. We released this RFI. We got a very robust response. I think a really high quality response. There are over 360 pages of material were provided, which have been collected, so they're available on the internet. And I'm just going to go through a couple of the things which are most relevant here in the context of looking at programming systems and programming languages and technologies and so on. And there's a full set of slides that are available on the internet as well. So first, here's the things that you might find most interesting. There are the first question that we asked was about dependencies and requirements, right? So what kinds of things do people need? And so the thing that I will point out here is that this word cloud that I created via this really nice program that comes from a group at the University of Arizona took all of the requirements people talked about, and there's one big word in the middle in red. It says languages, right? That's programming languages, and this is a key requirement that people have when they think about their programming environments and programming systems and libraries and software. And of course, there are lots of different things that people need around this, right? I mean, and all sorts of different languages, right? So people talked about things like MPI and ways to manage parallelism. They talked about package managers like SPAC. They talked about machine learning toolkits like TensorFlow and PyTorch, parallelism libraries like Cocos, and math libraries like PETSI. They mentioned things like OpenMP and Fortran and LAPACK and there, so lots of different things. But the point I'm going to make here is that programming languages and their libraries and their associated ecosystem are quite central to the sustainability of the software ecosystem as a whole. And so that's obviously a very important consideration in this context. So the requirements that these things fulfill, I mean, I think this is perhaps somewhat obvious, but again, it has to do with mathematical routines and data analysis. It has to do with portability and managing data movement and parallelism. It has to do with packaging and programming environments and visualization and other kinds of tooling. And also, it has to do with interfacing with the wider community. So, it's really important that people adopt packages and tools that have that kind of reach, that can integrate with the wider ecosystem that's viewed as being very critical to sustainability. And so when we ask people, across all those things, what are those things that are not already present? Do you, anticipate requiring in the future? In some sense, the answer was more of the same. So, people need better tools. They need better, more community-aligned processes. They need better support for machine learning and sparse algorithms and so on. So, so that's really quite key. We also asked, what kinds of aspects of successful projects are needed for sustainability. And so this is a kind of non-technical slide, but I think goes to community, and I include this specifically because here this is a community around a programming system and a programming language, and that's great. And so one of the things that comes up is, well, how do you create successful communities like this? Because not all open source software has a successful community around it, and people provided, of course, a lot of different opinions. And if I start from the bubble here on the right, you can see, I mean, obviously one thing is funding, right? You need people who can be paid to work on things that they care about, and to some extent you want that funding to be diversified, and to sort of take advantage of the strengths of different kinds of organizations. But people were also really worried about how they can have a broad impact, right? Do they have the right incentives in place at their organizations and in their teams and so on? Can they adopt and participate in the development of standards? And can they create software in a way that integrates with the wider ecosystem? Can they participate in projects that have inclusive and transparent governance and follow community best practices, and provide a kind of path within the community to incubate new things, and to manage the overall life cycle of things, right? So you want to be able to have some way of getting small things started and growing them in a sustainable way. And then when things become not useful anymore, you need to be able to transition off of them onto other things. And then, how do you have a strong structure around the community, in the sort of legal and sense that services can be provided, non-technical services, but services that are important to the community, like managing intellectual property and licensing and so on, dealing with partnerships and technology transfer, involving the private sector, where that's appropriate and helpful, and having a system and a structure in place that can provide liability and other protections, so that organizations, not just large organizations but also small organizations, can play a part, while being appropriately protected. And so when we asked about what are the key requirements, what practices tend to lead to the establishment of these successful communities, it was really a mirror of these kinds of things, right? So it's integration with the wider community, it's adoption of best practices, and it's support for community development and agile technology transfer, which is our way of saying sort of involvement of the private sector and other outside organizations, so that you can grow the community around a particular piece of software. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions.
Well, I will get us started with questions, Hal. Everyone else, feel free to raise your hand if you have questions for Hal, or put your questions in chat, and I'd be happy to share them. So one of the questions I had when you mentioned a couple of times programmability and productivity, and in the DOE and the research that's going on in the DOE and that ASCR is keeping an eye on, like how is programming productivity being evaluated? How is it being discussed?
Okay, so that's a really important question, and I think, well, for one thing, I'll say, how is it being discussed? Well, I mean, it's being discussed as being essential, right? And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, productivity means different things to different people. So, you definitely have, in different contexts, different definitions of productivity that are really key to the mission areas of those relevant people. So, to some people, productivity means I need to be able to take a graduate student or an undergraduate student who only knows Python and get them to use this thing, within a couple of weeks. And that's my definition of productivity. In other contexts, you have, professional programmers who need to be able to create really high performance, large scale systems, and do so in a way that enables them to, minimize the amount of redundant work they're doing, and perhaps most importantly, or as a key consideration, have code which is relatively performant and also highly likely to be correct, because one thing that is definitely clear across the board is that productivity is a whole life cycle concept. It is not the time from when I start with a blank file to the time when I am able to compile the first version of my program. A, most people don't start with blank files, and B, it's really only once it's suitably debugged and working appropriately that it counts. And so you really have to account for all those things. But all that having been said, the DOE has invested in a number of projects over the years, ideas being one of them, which have specifically looked at these issues of productivity and how you might measure that and how you can improve it. And so I think those things will continue in the future.
All right, thank you. I think the order of hands was Brad, and then Josh, and then Pedro. So Brad?
Why don't we let Josh go first? I'm happy to stay at the end of the queue.
All right, Josh?
All right, thanks, Brad. And thanks, Hal. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm joining from Oak Ridge National Lab.
Yeah, I can hear.
Thanks for that overview of what's a really wide range of concerns. You mentioned reliability metrics a couple of times. Are we talking mean time to failure or soft errors or uncertainty quantification? Yeah, what kinds of reliability concerns are key for the DOE?
Well, you should tell me. But I'll tell you that when you have complex systems, there are always concerns about reliability, and the way that we measure reliability in a holistic sense, right? In saying, what is the expected time to complete some set of activities, accounting for the fact that there will be failures, then that gets translated down into more specific reliability requirements on specific components and pieces of software and so on. But it also then relates to the thing I was just talking about before, which is that, you know, people need their software systems and their systems in general to be you know, correct and to operate you know, as you know, correctly as possible, right? I mean, like, nothing is perfect, right? So I don't want to I don't want to imply that, you know, the goal here is, you know, 0 errors you know, in hardware or software, because that's not physically possible. But you know, we do want to you know, minimize the degree to which users sort of experience failure and have to kind of manually deal with it. And so, you know, yes, you know, while there will be problems, we want it to be clear when there is a problem, right? So you want systems that have a sufficient amount of kind of built-in diagnostic capability to handle that. And B, you want systems that are robust to errors and to problems, so that when they do occur, there's some way of dealing with them. And you know, and so of course the traditional way of doing this was like, well, we have simulations, so we do checkpoint restart, and you know, we just, you know, we calculate in, you know, how often do we expect the, you know, system to fail, and then, you know, how often are we going to have to restart. But of course, with modern systems, with experiments and data streaming and multi-system workflows and all this kind of stuff, that all becomes much more complicated. You know, plus the, you know, you want to have you know, often different kinds of guarantees about correctness. Plus, you can now throw in security and security concerns, and you know, there's it becomes a challenging problem.
All right, thank you. Pedro, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. Hi, Hal. This is Pedro Valero from OML too. Yours is not very far away from here. I would like to ask Hal about, in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges and the solution that we should develop for programming model today?
Well, I think a couple of things. So you know, one is, maybe I'll subdivide this into 2 parts. So there are, how do you most effectively program the state-of-the-art systems that we have now, right? I mean, I mentioned that, you know, we just have Frontier online now. It you know, measured its exaflop, but of course now the challenge is that we have to get real applications running on the system to have real scientific impact. And in addition, we've been investing a lot of money in a particular set of applications within ECP, which we hope serve as exemplars to you know, draw lessons from in enabling a whole wider community of applications to run on those systems. But that has to happen. And so, you know, enabling all that whole wider user community to come in and use these machines and get great science out of them is going to be a key challenge. And you know, and many of the applications that we will eventually want to have running on these systems that, you know, may not even have started porting yet. I mean, it's not true for the ECP applications, of course, but there's a wider community of applications that have to run on the systems. And so that's, you know, that's a challenge, right? And that includes, you know, programming and managing parallelism and debugging and profiling and like all those things, you know, all feed into that. Then the second category is, what do you do about future systems? So this is what I was, you know, talking about at the kind of at the you know, end of the beginning part of the talk when I started talking about co-design and you know, how do you create a, you know, programming environment and associated applications that are flexible enough to deal with the sort of hardware and systems that are to come, understanding that we you know, we don't know what these systems are yet, but the opportunity is that we get to help define what they are. I mean, this is the really neat challenge about, you know, being, you know, on the state of the art here and pushing forward that technology, is that you get to influence where it goes. And so that's the other, you know, set of challenges. Shares challenges with debugging and profiling and all that kind of stuff, but is now in the context of, you know, what is the future hardware going to look like, and you know, how do you create systems that let you explore what that should be?
All right.
Thank you, Hal.
Thank you for the question, Pedro, and the answer, Hal. Harumi, would you like to ask your question that you put in the chat?
Sure, let me unmute. I was double muted. So you mentioned that hardware is becoming more and more heterogeneous, that we have, like, it seems like we have a larger variety of compute devices and GPUs and different types of memory, and it's becoming more important that they all work together. So I was wondering, do you also see greater, like, increasing heterogeneity amongst the communities of users? Because I understand there probably has always been some heterogeneity between, say, the scientists versus the programmers, HPC programmers, but is that becoming more pronounced with the introduction of, like, machine learning and AI? And also, like the hardware devices, is it becoming more important that they can share results and work together? And then if so, what do you think are the approaches for resolving that?
Okay. Well, first I'll say yes and yes. So, yes, we are definitely seeing a wider spectrum of users. They're taking part in scientific computing, and part of this is because there is a larger and larger set of problems being driven by the increasing amounts of data that we have in the world, about the world, where people are getting to the point where well, in the past they would have been just fine with loading data into Excel or running some little Python script on their laptop or what have you. Just given the greater amount of data that's available, the increasing fidelity of sensors and other things, now processing all that data maybe is not something you can do on your laptop or do in Excel or some programming system that doesn't really scale in the same way. So now people are looking at these kinds of technologies, which are either HPC technologies or kind of akin to or peer to HPC technologies, and that's bringing more people into the fold of looking at the kinds of technologies that we care about. And so in addition, as you mentioned, the set of techniques around machine learning have introduced a whole new set of complexities and challenges into that programming system, and so we have a number of challenges where we have an increasing number of scientists and engineers who also have to do some level of programming, but at the same time, we're trying to support them in different ways, right? They have different use cases, and we're trying to make everything more productive for everybody, right? Which introduces more challenges. Plus we have a kind of new community of users. We have the entire data science community, which is now looking a lot more like the HPC community, and so trying to fold all of these things together and create systems that work for everybody is really challenging. But the good news is that along with this wider community actually has come a larger ecosystem of work, right, and investment in programming language and programming system technologies, and in data management technologies and everything else. And so it's it was the case in years past where you would say, well, yes, like there's a lot of investment in say big data systems, but that doesn't really translate to or impact HPC systems. HPC is like its own little island, and the reality is it's not its own little island anymore, because when you have large internet multinationals that are also trying to do compute and machine learning model training on terabytes of data or petabytes of data, well, that's an HPC problem. They're now treating it like an HPC problem, and that's bringing everything together so that there's a much larger community that's now learning from each other and co-investing and taking advantage of synergies and everything else. I think the other and the other aspect of this is that because of all of this, we're seeing an increasing use of higher level programming systems, right? So people are trying to use Python-based systems and other things to program both data science problems, right, but also programming for HPC problems. And I think that taken all together, this broadening of the community is really important, promising, and impactful. But it's a real trend.
Can I add a little bit more to my question? So it seems to me that it becomes even more important to help those users write new tools and new libraries in the languages they want, like Python, and therefore languages like Arcuda and CHIUW become more important because they enable people to write new functions and new libraries more easily.
Yeah, well, I think that all of these technologies that are enabling people to program more productively are really important.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Harumi, for that nice plug. And also thank you, Hal, for your keynote. Everybody, if you could take yourself off mute and let's show our appreciation for Hal's keynote.
Hey.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
I appreciate the invitation.